This, of course, is a very big week for San Francisco and, frankly, the world, because the world has come to San Francisco for the Global Climate Action Summit organized by Governor Brown and other leaders from around the world, and this is one of the recognized affiliate events for the summit. Just yesterday, Governor Brown made some very important announcements. He signed SB 100, which commits California to 100% renewable energy by the year 2045. And we're already at a little over 30% renewable energy, which is remarkable considering where we were just 10 years ago. And then in addition to that, the governor signed an executive order committing the state to be carbon neutral by 2045, which is another very ambitious goal. I think anyone would say, experts, that we don't know exactly all the components of how to get there, but setting an ambitious goal is the way we make progress, and hats off to Governor Brown for his leadership in this. Why are we here today? If you look on a consumption-based methodology, particularly in the Bay Area, but many parts of the world as well, food represents almost 20% of your carbon footprint. And that includes how it's produced, how it's grown, how it's transported, how it's packaged, and sadly, how much of it is wasted. And in this region, there's a tremendous amount of innovation and expertise that is here, that is working through companies, through schools, through universities, through catering businesses, restaurants, cafes, that are trying to bring the best intelligence on how to make our eating systems, food systems, more sustainable. And one of the great things about this region, too, is that there's a culture around, at least around this issue, of sharing expertise. People are learning from one another, and the whole idea of this conference is to spread the word, to make sure that this intelligence and tradition of innovation is extended to people who need to have the knowledge. And we're delighted to be in an area that has so many experts, and I think over the course of today, there's a lot of information sharing around best practices, and that's the purpose that we have today in convening you as well as our speakers. I want to thank LinkedIn for hosting us here at this wonderful facility, and also the Bay Area Air Quality Management District for being a lead sponsor, as well as our other sponsors, which you'll see up here on the screen. We'll recognize them at other points during the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the program, Chef Traci Des Jardins. She's one of America's most acclaimed chefs. She's been a longtime supporter of the farm-to-table and sustainability movements. She's a philanthropist. She's been active in the development of new food products. It's a real honor to have us here with us today. Please welcome Traci Des Jardins.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to LinkedIn for hosting this event and to Acterra for inviting me to give this address. About 17 years ago, when Jardiniere was about 4 years old, we initiated an unprecedented campaign to look at our own business practices and contemplate how we might be better at what we were doing. I was well aware of the daily environmental footprint as I was constantly dealing with the dumpster, which was overly full every day. Cardboard and bottles were hauled off by ambitious guys in dubious trucks, but still about 90% of our trash was going into landfill. Today it's about 7%. We started a composting program at that time, which was no easy feat. We had to give green waste back to our farmers. Soon the city followed with their program, which made things much easier. We hosted ESL classes for our non-English speaking staff. This solidified their loyalty and gave them a sense of place. We had health care for our employees, which made us among the few in the restaurant business who did. We analyzed the supply chain of all of our products and created a rating system specifically for fish. Monterey Bay Seafood Watch was only in its infancy at this point in time. We sought out sustainable meat producers and began to discuss internally with our service members, our service team, and our customers what all of this meant. Armed with this extensive descriptions of our initiatives and a great sense of pride in all that we were accomplishing, I went off to New York to media visits. food arts, bon appetit, food and wine, gourmet. I sat and talked about garbage, sustainable farming, how we should not be eating Chilean sea bass or factory farm pork, chicken, or beef. The journalists sat with blank expressions on their faces, as if they couldn't understand a word that I was saying, which I actually think that they couldn't. Or as if I was a complete nut job from Northern California. I may as well have been wearing a tie-dye shirt with flowers in my hair. It took another decade before that coast seemed to get it at all. I remember about 7 years later, Vanity Fair published a green issue, and I thought, well, now it's mainstream, but even now they still don't have composting in New York City. But here we are in the midst of business leaders in beautiful Northern California with a room full of people who are not just interested in talking about, but also committed to finding pathways towards sustainability. So it's no small exaggeration to say that I'm glad to be here and glad that you are here too. All those years ago, I believed in sustainability for the very same reasons that I do today. Cooking is a privilege. We have the ability to touch people's lives through food. We're part of that amazing first date, memorable birthday, landmark anniversary, important business deals, weddings, memorial services. We touch people's lives in all of these important junctures. And it is our immense privilege to do so. And as you all well know, many of us are in people's lives up to 3 times a day. It is possible that some of you feed some people more than anyone else in their lives. You become their home, a place of comfort, a place where they can arrive without thinking. You earn their trust. We have the power to complement moments, to provide refuge, and to entertain or comfort with food. And all of us, big company or 40-seat restaurant chef, all of us cook to feed people, to nourish. The core of that nourishment lies in sustenance. Sustenance gives us all of the energy to go about our daily lives, to live, to make changes, to inspire, or just to go about the daily drudgery of washing dishes. Without sustenance, nothing could be possible, and without sustainability, we will have nothing in the future. When we talk about sustainability, it's easy to focus on small fixes and easy solutions, but the approach is holistic. It is an acknowledgement of our role in people's lives and the world. It's an acknowledgement of the farmers, the ranchers, the fishmongers, accountants, managers, the diners. We all have a vested interest in a more sustainable food system. Because it is the right thing to do, because it is our future to impact as we will, because it is why we got into cooking in the first place, to sustain, because we all must support each other in accomplishing these goals. Many of us in this room may have entered this industry for different reasons. You fell in love with food because you grew up cooking with your mother or grandmother or another passionate family member. Or maybe your primary caregiver was working so hard that the only options were fast food or from the freezer or a can. So you are seeking refuge and know that food can be more than that. Or who knows, you saw a job listing on LinkedIn and thought, I could do that. And here you are, all of a sudden running food operations for multinational companies. I entered the food industry because I found a passion. I grew up on my father's grilled chicken and my mother's handmade tortillas. I fell in love with whole hog rendered into carnitas and fish on a stick on the beaches of Mexico. My job for the last 30 years has been to turn those memories into meals and then those into moments. Food service takes these moments and makes them available at scale. So the fish inspired by that beach moment years ago might be found in your kitchens as much as it would be at Jardiniere. Many of the cooks that I have had in my kitchens are probably working for many of you. Your kitchens likely know not just about whole hog cookery, but also about the giants of the restaurant years, Robuchon, Trois Gros, Bocuse. But as much as the world of dining and the business of food have changed during my tenure in the industry, so have the circumstances with which we all cook. The fish are less plentiful in our oceans. A combination of overfishing, climate change, and invasive species have drastically altered what fish swim where and what fish we can eat and how we think about seafood generally. Years of industrial scale farming have meant that there are fewer and fewer family farms raising hogs. That consolidation is no longer sustainable. When earnest, hardworking farmers must give up their land to satisfy scale. We end up with less delicious homogeneous products, and we increase our risk for devastating losses with the monoculture. And so too has our relationship with our personnel changed. Per the Pew Research Center, the real value of Americans' minimum wage peaked in 1968. In other words, we're paying less per hour than we did in 1968. And people are part of our sustainability goals as well. As our industry matures, we must also consider the people, the cooks, of course, but also the farmers and the drivers and everyone in our chain. We need to find ways to guarantee a living wage for our laborers, to make sure that women are paid equitably, that parents are given enough time to bond with their children, and that when people whose hands are closest to our food and our bodies every day are sick, that they can feel comfortable taking a day off. Certainly it sounds difficult, and I'm living proof that policy changes can drastically alter the bottom line of a business that you've built over the years. Not all of this change will come easily, and very likely very little of it will come for free. But these are investments, and since we are all long-term thinkers in this room, building companies that will outlast ourselves, we can approach an industry that values sustainability and changes in climate with the full knowledge that the business case is not just apparent, but essential for anyone who wants to continue to compete. You cannot build a business around fish that are no longer in the ocean, nor around labor that can no longer afford to work. Sustainability has been not just about what we can do for the environment, but even more so about how we can think about every element of our businesses and maximize both the value and the social good of that product. Right here in California, the cost of inaction around climate change is already too clear. The fires that have burned through our state over the last 2 years have not only been devastating, as I watched friends lose homes and businesses, but will also require significant capital to recover from. It's estimated that the 2017 fires will cost upwards of $2.5 billion, and this year's fires, which still burn, are projected to cost even more. Those are dollars that have to come from somewhere, and the loss of property and business will mean fewer potential customers for all of us, and of course affects very gravely our employees. The people in this room have the opportunity not simply to learn about best practices for today's climate-friendly food service or restaurant, but also, and more importantly, to set the path for what tomorrow's industry might accomplish. We've seen the power of leadership in our industry. Across America, you can now find locally sourced produce picked seasonally at restaurants in any big city or small. Farmers markets are part of so many communities now. Up and down California, farmers have reduced their water needs while continuing to increase production, proving that we are more capable than we give ourselves credit for, and that there are larger profit margins available once we commit to our goals. All restaurants, all food service companies are in the business of better margins. We have to be. And cooks often lead the way in that regard, proving again and again that to search for beauty in the discarded can deliver something delicious. As cooks, we know to save the rind of the Parmesan or the skin of an onion so that it might live again as a base flavor in a soup or stock. As cooks, we know that we reuse containers, not because it's good for the earth, but because it's economically efficient. As cooks, we know that ugly produce is often the most delicious, and that carrot tops can make a great pesto, and that beet greens deserve a place on your plate. We know that food waste is very expensive, and we find ways to reduce it. In applying these lessons to larger companies, to scalable solutions, even minor improvements in efficiency can have dramatic impact on the bottom line. A reduction of food costs through the intelligent repurposing of waste streams or other approaches by 2% would mean an entirely different bottom line for my restaurant. Imagine what it would mean for your company. Even just reducing the percentage of meat in a burger and adding grain can save a business significant money, and might even make a tastier burger. Underused cuts of fish, like collar, for instance, have been discarded for years, but now find themselves at nightly specials in our best restaurants, earning proprietors money on products that at one point they threw away. The one at Al's Place in particular is delicious if you're looking for an example. Using proteins as an accent rather than the so-called center of the plate can dramatically improve food costs and do good for the planet at the same time. Serving plant-based meat can save so much water and landmass use that it's truly a no-brainer when the products are as good as, say, the Impossible Burger. Ultimately, the most compelling business case lies in the forecast for demand. Diners today receive a steady stream of information regarding climate change, environmental threats, and the state of our wildlife. Over 1 in 4 millennials prefer a plant-based diet, and of those who do eat meat, they eat it less often. California is often the leader for these kinds of movements, and our diners are deeply knowledgeable about what their purchases can affect. And that's a trend you can and should expect to continue to grow across the country. Wellness apps have taken over the workplace, but we know that wellness begins with us. Good food prepared well, served kindly, and delivered thoughtfully offers a baseline upon which a healthy lifestyle can be built. The surge in wellness apps is not only a moment in time, but it's also tied to workplace productivity. Workers are happier when they are healthiest, and happy people are more productive workers that build better teams. Our food done well is an investment that companies and individuals can make with meaningful return. Brand leaders that can point to investments in sustainable food practices stand to benefit as the marketplace evolves. That's not just to say that being sustainable is enough to sell a product, but rather that companies that can pursue sustainability while continuing to deliver a product of excellent quality will gain a competitive advantage in a marketplace that we all know is crowded. From the independent diner to the large contractor seeking subs, people are looking for sustainable solutions, and we can offer that to them. It's powerful for the brand of the business and powerful to be able to stand behind something that you believe in and that you know will make a positive difference. Today at this conference, I ask you to remember why you are in the business in the first place, why you believe it is important for people to eat well. If you're like me, there's no better feeling than delivering something delicious to someone who needs it. You never know what that diner might need, but it's just in the offering that we do something generous, ambitious, and kind. Sustainability must be at the heart of that offering in order for it to remain sincere. We cannot ignore the consequences of inaction. We must seek innovative solutions to the problems all around us. We must innovate, and it must be delicious. We must push ourselves to be more responsible because we know that that effort will have positive bottom line consequences and that it is the right thing to do. We must share our efforts with each other so that we might benefit from the work. We must hold ourselves accountable for this industry that we all rely on, both for our living and for our daily bread. This room is full of amazing people. I'm honored and humbled to have the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I've seen firsthand what businesses can accomplish in addressing problems that seem intractable or terrifying. And I've found inspiration in those experiences. When I left that media tour in New York so many years ago, it seemed like sustainability might be something that this country might never be ready to talk about. But we are here, you are here, and we need to talk about it. Our collective futures will be defined by the actions that we choose to take, the businesses that we continue to build, and the decisions that we come to in rooms like this. I am excited to see what we are able to accomplish. Thank you. I'm happy to take a few questions if there are any questions in the audience. Okay.
Can you tell us a little more about your restaurant, how many employees, just kind of a picture?
So I have 7 restaurants here in the Bay Area. 5 of those are in conjunction with Bon Appetit Management Company, who has been a partner of mine for 16 years through my work at AT&T Park with that company and then out in the Presidio. I'm also a consultant for Impossible Foods.
Chef Tracy, thanks so much for the speech. I was wondering how you feel this spotlight is for people like you who cook or have access to the customers to educate them about the importance of food choices.
I think, one of the beautiful things about, this so-called celebrity of chefs these days is that we have the opportunity to influence and to really speak in larger platforms about food and to really change consumers' habits. And it's an incredible privilege to do so. Through work with the James Beard Foundation. They have some really very focused boot camps now to educate chefs around sustainability practices and to really be able to motivate our industry to influence as we can through our diners and media appearances, et cetera, to change the way people think about food and how they eat.
So you said you went from 90% of your waste that went to landfill to 7%. And what advice would you give to other restaurants that are going to do that same change? And what were the biggest hurdles that you had doing that?
I mean, I tried to sort of describe what it was like at that point in time because we didn't have the partners that we now have with regards to the waste companies. I think in the Bay Area now, given the programs that are available for residential and commercial use, that it's kind of a done deal. I think that the focus now needs to be on other areas. I was just in Montana, and I was, shocked that all of the garbage was going into the same bin and going out into landfill. And we know what happens when that goes on. I could go on and on about trash. I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's amazing to me that today we don't have composting and recycling programs in every city in America. And I think that that's low-hanging fruit, even though it was a little painful to make that transition 17 years ago. Today, it's easy, much easier, but it's absolutely necessary that we march towards that movement and having that kind of accessibility in every city in America.
Plastic waste seems to be like climbing in people's consciousness now. And I used to work at a restaurant when I was like in college, and I remember there was a lot of plastic associated with wrapping food. And how is your restaurant managing that, and what advice would you have just as we move forward? What options are out there?
It's funny you bring that up because that is it's my next area of focus because we do use rolls and rolls and rolls of plastic wrap to contain food in restaurants, and we haven't really figured out a solution to substitute that. However, we are now able to keep that sort of clean plastic, if you will, and that's going into recyclables as well now. So it's getting repurposed in some other form. I don't know actually what form, but it is an area of focus that I would like to concentrate on. Is what kind of innovation is there in that world of clean wrap, and what sort of alternatives might we have to wrapping food and keeping it clean and safe in our food service environments. So you hit the nail on the head in terms of where I'm going and what my next focus in waste is. Oh. Yes.
There's also the problem of our supplies that come to us with all of this plastic around them. It's hard to get rid of that.
The question was about plastic around supplies. My son went to Waldorf school, and he's very, very aware of environmental stuff. And so he came to me about 6 months ago, and he said, "I'm not eating anything from the grocery store that comes in plastic anymore, so you're going to have to figure out how to feed me without it having touched plastic." So I think that as consumers, we have the ability to influence, obviously, by what we buy. And once you sort of you bring that into your consciousness and you're looking at packaging, I think as consumers we can really, put this to demand that things are packaged more differently, and that it's unnecessary. I mean, it's unbelievable how often you have to get a knife out to open up, a wrench or whatever it is that you buy at the store. And again, I think that as our consciousness raises and we're able to make demands in terms of these companies that we buy from, that we can influence change in packaging, and it's something that we should all be thinking about.
I'm curious your thoughts on, I think a lot of us feel better when we recycle all the plastic. Thanks, hi.
Yeah.
Hi, and I've been seeing stories lately about our plastic waste is being sent to China and undeveloped countries, and now, there's limited capacity for that, the huge amount of recycling. Like, we're in one way succeeding by recycling, but in a new way we're creating a new problem. And what are your thoughts about that?
I think that being informed consumers is always, really the key, and there aren't easy answers. That you have to drill down into, again, that supply chain, and I think that, conversely, that where that recycling is going and what's happening with it, because I think that, a lot of times you'll sort your own recycling. I have a house in the Central Sierra, and they come and pick up the trash, and then they put it all into the same bin, and I think to myself, what are they doing on the other end? I can't imagine that they're sorting that again. Something wrong is happening on that other end. And so I think that we have to be curious, we have to do research, we have to read and be informed, and really understand what's happening on that other end, from the food that we buy from the beginning to the waste that we create and the end, and where it's going and what's happening with it. And our curiosity and perseverance will hopefully lead to big answers to really big problems.
Started practicing sustainability in your restaurants, what is the economic change? Have you seen a difference in the cost of things in terms of, grass-fed beef 14 years ago compared to now, or heritage pork?
Yeah, I mean, grass-fed beef was really interesting. We launched a program in 2004 or 2005, thereabouts, at Acme Chop House, which was a predecessor to Public House. And it was at the very, very beginning of grass-fed meat. And we actually really had to seek out ranchers and farmers that were growing grass-fed, and it was really very arduous in terms of acquisition of those products and processing, et cetera. Now, 16 years later, it's a completely different market where you see grass-fed beef on the market, and is very popular. So there's this huge arc, and you can sort of see the growth around those kinds of products, and our support as consumers of those things that are more sustainable is the pivotal point to making those companies that are more mindful successful.
That can be cost prohibitive.
It can be cost prohibitive, but
Conscientious.
yeah. I think it's, there's a cost someplace in cheap food, and we know this. And so if you follow that supply chain and you think about it like that, it might be cheaper in dollars that you're spending, but there's a cost somewhere along the line, and somebody has paid for that, either in exploitation of employees, exploitation of the land, or just producing a product that's of less quality. So I think that we have to switch our thinking around what looks like expensive, because the costs that we're paying for it are dollars that are well spent to pay for something that is produced in a sustainable manner. And we have to reverse our thinking, because there's a cost somewhere along the line, and there will be a cost in the future based on the impact to the environment.
Chef, you talked about both reducing meat consumption, or you talked about sort of consolidation of farmers, and you also said you're an advisor on Impossible. I'm hoping you can just talk a little bit about how you think about animal agriculture and climate change and the food you serve in your restaurants.
I mean, animal agriculture is devastating. You read the statistics on it, and there's no question that it's devastating, effect on water consumption, on waste, and on all climate change, global greenhouse effect, all of that. That said, we are a society that has been eating meat for thousands of years, and Pat Brown's thinking when he went to produce the Impossible Burger was really knowing that consumers are not going to give up this thing that is so intrinsic in their diet for really probably any reason. And so, it really is to companies like Impossible Foods, I think, that are going to change consumers' behavior and offer them a product that is as satisfying as, a hamburger made from beef. We're finding that at Public House, we serve a beef burger and the Impossible Burger side by side, and the Impossible Burger is actually outpacing beef sales. So that just blows my mind. And it shows you that given an alternative that is as tasty and nutritious and satisfying, that consumers will actually grab onto it and make that choice to do good by making that choice of eating a plant-based burger as versus a beef burger. And so hopefully we'll see that. I mean, Northern California is always a little bit like low-hanging fruit, and you want to test it out in other markets to see what that impact might be. But we're also seeing, in our sales in the Midwest, that there is a response to the product as opposed to beef. When people can really say side by side, this is equally delicious, that they're going to make the choice to do the right thing. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Chef Tracy, one more question for you. In terms of wellness, food waste, and portion size, if you mind talking about that. That might not apply in your restaurants, but historically, in the last 40 years, our plates have gotten bigger, our food waste has gotten larger. So what's your thought on that, and how restaurants and big institution cafeterias can help with the portion size?
Well, I mean, I think that portion size, as proven by the obesity epidemic in our country, that obviously we're doing something wrong with regards to, what people are consuming and how they're eating and how much of it they're eating. I think that, I personally have sort of always looked to Europe and having worked in France and having an understanding of how they eat there and what portion size is to really, from a restaurant standpoint, to reduce those portion sizes. And 21 years ago when I opened Jardiniere, there was a tremendous amount of sensitivity around, portion size and how much food we put on the plate. But I have to tell you that today, I would guess that we've probably reduced those portion sizes by a third in terms of the total amount of food that goes on the plate. And there's much less resistance to that from our diners. They don't complain about small portions anymore. And so to me, that means, I don't have the stats on consumer behavior, but I can tell you just from, our small, analytics that we do in the restaurant that people are changing the way that they're eating and have different expectations around the amount of food that'll be on a plate.
Hello?
Many people think that must mean going all in on vegetarian or even vegan, and of course a lot of people aren't ready to do that. How do you talk through to the people who are, let's say, less converted or less committed to help in this transition?
I actually myself am a pretty big meat eater. I mean, that's just, grew up on a farm, and, that was just part of like how we ate, and I still do consume, meat proteins. I try to be very mindful of where those come from, that I'm buying from people who are practicing sustainability. But I think it's also, not being absolute in terms of asking people to give something up, that perhaps if you eat meat, 5 nights a week, that you reduce that down to 2, or if you eat 8 ounces of meat, that you drop that down to an accent on a plate of 3 ounces. It's not about absolutes, although, if you read the statistics on where we're going, it should be about absolutes. But I think that in order to get people to sort of, move the needle and to do better, you can't have those absolutes. And so I think that, products that, that are being developed, like the Impossible Burger, really do offer, incredible alternatives to, that burger that you might eat, twice a month, or however often you eat a burger. If you just choose the Impossible Burger 50% of the time, you're already doing better.
Hello. So
Where are we?
Sorry.
Yeah, go. Thank you.
So I'm not in the business, so this is maybe a naive question, and I haven't really worked in a kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
But with Governor Brown's goal to get to fossil-free California, what do you think about moving to all-electric kitchens with induction stoves and all of that? Do you have experience with that?
Induction is incredibly promising. I mean, I do think that, there is innovation. I mean, again, it comes back to sort of the cost of that innovation, and, being able to sort of assess what we can afford in the restaurant business. The restaurant business has become less and less profitable, and we're really trying to figure out ways to change that model, and that very well may be, a way that we can move forward and change the model. I haven't built a kitchen in quite some time, so I'm not completely up to speed on what all of the green technology is that's available. But it's certainly something that I look at as I start a new project to assess what those energy consumption needs are in the context of the restaurant, and also obviously in any sort of output and greenhouse gas effects.
I just wanted to add to the livestock issue. The statistics that are out there are more focused on confined animal feed operations, and there's a growing group of ranchers that practice regenerative ranching practices that help sequester carbon, that provide nutrients for our soil, creating nutrient-dense food, water quality and water holding capacity, and biodiversity and supporting wildlife.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, as this world population grows, even though those sustainable, farmers are, hats off to them. There's no question, as their efforts to do the right thing. Unfortunately, the amount of land mass available as this population grows will never be able to feed our growing population. And so, when I first got involved with Impossible Foods, it was really, for me, very challenging to sort of like all of my beliefs to get involved and think about a company like this. But as I have sort of evolved in that process, I now feel 500% sure that it is companies like this that are going to change the world and the way that we eat, and change the way that food is sourced and produced, to be sustainable. And as much as I love the farmers who are practicing sustainable, and stewards of the land, those solutions are not big enough to meet the needs of our growing population. And we really need massive innovation in this sector to be able to have the kind of impact that needs to be made to stop what we've already started.
Yellow.
So a big part, and you mentioned this, a big part of our carbon footprint is the delivery of food and the changes that we're seeing. My question is regarding how we're moving away from retail. We're moving away from consumers going to restaurants. They're getting food ready-made, delivered to their doorstep. Is that something that's a positive trend in terms of the food industry? What are the sort of the concerns?
Well, not for me as a restaurateur. Jokes aside, I don't know the statistics on what the impact is of, individual delivery service, but I would imagine it's not a very pretty picture. From the standpoint of restaurants, I'm thinking more in terms of consolidation in delivery processes, because for example, we buy so much of our food from, say, the Central Valley. It gets put in trucks, brought to restaurants. The trucks drive around, they deliver from restaurant to restaurant, and then you create this waste in the city, and then the waste has got to go back out to Vacaville to be processed. How can we keep food waste and consolidate all those activities so that there's less back and forth and there's less moving around of these products in order to better impact our environment, and that's the way that I'm thinking about it. So I don't think that the home delivery thing is really helping in that whole cause, because you're taking individualized meals, whether it's for one person or four person, and you're taking them from point A to point B for one person or four people. That doesn't make sense to me. And so I think that, as much as we can stop moving around so much and driving cars around that are emitting, greenhouse gases, the better off we'll be. So it'll be interesting to see where that sector lands and what happens to that whole industry.
I'll take the last question over here.
One more? No? All right, well, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing more about the conference, and it was really a pleasure to be here. Thank you.